Starting in the 1870s, a visionary Jerusalem rabbi was consumed by the idea of resurrecting the ancient mitzvah of guarding the site of the Beis Hamikdash. However, his fervor was met with indifference, even opposition from others, sparking a halachic debate of significant proportions. As this story unfolds, unexpected connections emerge, revealing the curious involvement of the Chabad rebbes in this intriguing tale. So, in the year 1888, Tafreish Memches, there was a sefer that was printed in Eretz Yisrael, authored by a man named Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel Gelbstein. We're going to be mentioning his name a lot tonight, so let's get used to his name, Hillel Moshe Meshel Gelbstein. The title of his sefer was Mishkanois La'avir Yaakov. This is a pasuk in Tehillim Perek Kuf Lamed Beis, referring to the Beis Hamikdash as Mishkanois La'avir Yaakov. Dwelling places for La'avir, the might of Yaakov. The might of Yaakov. Who's the might of Yaakov? The might of Yaakov is the Eibishter. Why is it referring to the Beis Hamikdash in Tehillim as the dwelling place for Dafka, the God of Yaakov specifically? So the Radak there explains two explanations. Number one, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the only one that made a neder b'makam hamikdash was Yaakov. Yaakov made a neder in the place that later became the Beis Hamikdash, number one. And number two, which is the type of thing Jews would later do when they would go to the Beis Hamikdash. What would they do? Nedarim and nedavis all the time. Number two, he was the only one of the others who had a clear vision that the Beis Hamikdash is actually going to be built there. And as a result, there's a stronger association of Yaakov with the Beis Hamikdash, and so that's why Tehillim Kuf Lamed Daled, Kuf Lamed Beis, refers to the Beis Hamikdash as Mishkanois La'avir Yaakov. So he used this as the title of his book, obviously indicating that the book is going to be something to do with the Beis Hamikdash. Now in the book, today, if you open it up, toward the beginning you'll see the following. In the original print in 1888, this was not in the beginning, this was all the way in the back of the book on Daf Nun Tes, but when they republished the book in the 1970s, they changed the order around. Let's read the following lines. Haskamas kvoik jushas, isha alekim, butzino kadisha, hagoin ha'amiti, sara teure benigla v'nister, rabon shal kol bnei hagoyla, admar Reb Menachem Mendel, harabi hagadol, mechaside Chabad, shayaraya mehemne, be'ir Lubavitch. Wow. We have here a haskama from the Tzemach Tzedek. This is a very, very big deal. The reason it's a big deal is because, as far as we know, other than this reference here, there's one sefer that has a quasi-haskama of the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek did not give haskamas. In 1866, this sefer was published in 1888. In 1866, there was a sefer that came out in Lvov that was called Ur HaGonos. Ur HaGonos was the teachings of a Talmud of the Maggid, whose name was Rabbi Yehuda Leib HaKohen. He's very famous because one of the things he's famous for is the Haskama. The Alter Rebbe, when he got a Haskama in Tanya, one of the people he got the Haskama from was this Rabbi Yehuda Leib HaKohen. Rabbi Yehuda Leib HaKohen didn't publish anything during his lifetime. A grandson of his, in 1866, published his teachings under the title Ur HaGonos. Came to the Tzemach Tzedek and said, maybe write something for us. In 1866, the Tzemach Tzedek passed away that year. Tafreish Chavav. The Tzemach Tzedek wrote back a letter basically saying, ain't darky to write haskamas, but I will write that when this book is published, I will purchase a copy. And the publisher put this in the front of Sefer Ur HaGonos as a haskama from the Tzemach Tzedek. And actually under that, the Tzemach Tzedek's letter, there's a line from 5 of the Tzemach Tzedek's sons, including the Reb Marash, I think it's 5 of them. I will also purchase a copy of this when it comes out, signed by Baruch Shalom, and Chaim Shner Zalman, and the Reb Marash, and one or two others as well. This is the only sefer that we know that has a quasi-haskama. I'm saying quasi-haskama because even the language he's tentative about his hesitation to give haskama. Kamuvin, the reason Tzemach Tzedek did it, or Bepashtos, this is the sefer of the person who gave haskama to the Tanya. So I'm not going to write something. So the Tzemach Tzedek wrote something. But Paul, I don't think the Tzemach Tzedek had the ability to purchase a copy because the Tzemach Tzedek passed away in Nisan Tafresh Chavav, and the book was not published by that time of the year, as far as I can tell. Fine. So did we find over here, in a book published in Tafresh Mamches, the second Haskamah given by the Tzemach Tzedek? Also, it'd be a little odd because it's so long. It's 22 years after the Tzemach Tzedek passed away, and all of a sudden a Haskamah surfaces. So what's going on over here? So we're going to answer this question and we're going to deal with this. But in order to get to the bottom of this first, let's do a little bit of a dive into what this sefer is all about. What is this sefer from Rabbi Hillel Moshe Meshel Gelbstein, titled Mishkanei Slaver Yaakov? What is he trying to do in this particular sefer? So as follows. First of all, a word about him and about this man. He was born in Eastern Europe. He was a chassid of Kotsk. He spent time in Lubavitch, and we'll talk more about that later. And then after the Tzemach Tzedek passed away, he was in Lubavitch for a few months. A few years after the Tzemach Tzedek passed away, he made Aliyah, went to Eretz Yisrael, and he lived the final years of his life. He lived in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, Eretz Kodesh, and that's where he published most of his farm, including this one. All right, what's the sefer all about? So we're going to begin with a passage from the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos, Maseches Tamid, dealing with the mitzvah of Shmiras HaMikdash. The Torah tells us that the Beis Hamikdash, there was one of the mitzvahs, one of the things that had to be done in the Beis Hamikdash, there's an asay and a lois asay, about guarding the Beis Hamikdash, having kohanim in some places and Levim in other places, standing there guarding. Says the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos, She'elu ha'shomrim she'shomrim ha'mikdash, eina machmas pacha. This is not because we're afraid that people are going to come and loot the Beis Hamikdash or steal things. That's not what this is about. Avos hederech gedula lebayis lekaved v'yikar. This is about magnifying the greatness and the honor and the dignity of the Beis Hamikdash. Right? When you go to a chashuva place, one of the signs of the prominence is the fact that you have an honor guard, and we even use the word an honor guard. That's what this is. This is an honor guard. This is not a protective guard. Indeed, this institution of guarding the Beis Hamikdash happened in the desert during the times of the Mishkan, and it happened in the times of Shloimeh, and it will happen va'ad la'ol mayad. This is an eternal mitzvah. So the Hillel Moshe Meshel picks up on this language, and this part of the sefer he wrote, actually, there's a date to this section of the sefer that he wrote in 1870, Kislev Tafresh Lamed. And he writes as follows. Why does the Rambam talk about that they were guarding the Beis Hamikdash in the times of the Mishkan and in the times of Shloimeh? What's he trying to say with this? So he says, what the Rambam is trying to say, this is evidence that it's not about Shmirah from Ganovim. This is not about protecting from thieves. Because in the Midbar, you didn't have Ganovim running around. There wasn't a threat. And B'mei Shloimeh, it was such a peaceful time, and the Am Yisrael was in such a strong state that also you didn't have a situation where foreigners could come and take. So if there was ever a time you didn't need shoymrim, it was then. And afal bikain, you had it. So that proves that Rambam's point that it's an honor guard, that it's not about the pachad. Okay, very good. But then he goes on to say his main point, and this is the main thesis of this sefer. From the language of the Rambam, it's very clear. Also today, although it has been destroyed, this mitzvah is still customary. Why? Rambam wrote, this mitzvah is va'ad la'ol mayad, forever. And if you're going to tell me he just meant to say that it's going to be when Moshiach comes, then he should have just said, v'chein la'asid lavai. Why did he say la'ol mayad? You know why? In came bisman hazeh today anu chayavim lechavdai uleroimamai. We have to do this mitzvah today. Why? Mipnei kavod hashchina. Because it's about the Shechina, and the Shechina's eina betela b'malkam hamikdash didn't go away. The special presence of the Eibishter that was there, Bisman Beis Hamikdash Kayam, is still there today. And so therefore, the same reason you need to have an honor guard then, you need to have an honor guard now. And he quotes another passage from the Rambam to stress this point that the Shechina is still in Makam HaMikdash the same way that it was during the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Rambam in Hilchos Beis HaBchira, Perek Vav, Halacha Tes Vav. Makrivin HaKarbanos Kulan, we could bring karbanis even without the Beis Hamikdash. Why? When we say that the Mikdash is sanctified and Yerushalayim is special, it's not because of any particular structure or building that is here. It's because of the Shechina. And the Shechina ain't a betela. The Shechina did not leave. We say in Parshas V'chukaisai, one of the klalas, V'ashi moisias mikdashechem. Hashem says, I will make your mikdash desolate. So notice, the Chachamim say, the Gemara Megillah says, it calls it a mikdash even when it's desolate, telling you that even though it's desolate, Alpha B'Kain is still a mikdash, it's still a place where Hashem dwells. And so therefore, we see that it's a special place, it's an important place. So, if the reason you have the honor guard is because of the Shechina, then you need to continue having it there today. And then he points to another Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Beis Abchira Perek Zayin talks about a different obligation, the obligation of Moira HaMikdash. Says the Rambam as follows. Though the Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed, the same way we're obligated to revere the Beis Hamikdash when it was built, in the same way we're obligated to revere the Beis Hamikdash when it's destroyed. And this has practical results. You're not allowed to enter an area or a zone where Bisman Abayis, you weren't allowed to go there, so today you're not allowed to go there. Another din, lo yeshe ba'azara, you're not allowed to sit down. There was always a din, you're not allowed to sit in the azara. Though the building is not there anymore, if you know where the place of the azara is, you're not allowed to sit in that location. And then the Rambam brings an interesting limud from the pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim where it equates Shabsosai to Shmoiru Mikdashi Tiro, equating the Beis Hamikdash to Shabbos. Mashmir Shabbos Lo'ilam, Af Meira Mikdash Lo'ilam. So too, Meira Mikdash is Lo'ilam, just like Shmira Shabbos is Lo'ilam. It's all we all understand. Shabbos didn't stop when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, so Meira Mikdash doesn't stop either. Says Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel, Oy Bazoi, if that's true for Meira, let us assume that the same thing is true for a separate but similar mitzvah of Shmiras HaMikdash. Number 6. Umatzinu lemeilaf mitzvahs kavod HaMikdash, mitzvahs Meira Mikdash. We should derive that, however, we deal with Meira HaMikdash should also affect how we think about the mitzvah of kavod HaMikdash. Kavod HaMikdash is the honor guard. So you want to know the dinim of kavod HaMikdash, look at Meira HaMikdash, and however it operates there, that's how it should operate here. V'ulai says Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel, Mishum Hachi lo husrach HaRambam lichpel hadvarim beperek ches l'inyan shmiras HaMikdash. Maybe that is why the Rambam didn't have to discuss this matter again in Perek Ches when talking about shmiras HaMikdash. Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel is dealing here with a problem. If he's right, why didn't the Rambam clearly say the mitzvah of shmiras HaMikdash, of keeping guards there, is noyeg ha'ayom? Why didn't the Rambam clearly say it? So it's a real problem. And he has to contend with the problem. What's the solution? That's in Perek Ches. In Perek Zayin, we learned about Meira HaMikdash. And in Perek Zayin, the Rambam already told us Meira HaMikdash is the same Bisman Abayis and Bisman HaChurban. So the Rambam already said it. So if he said it for Meira HaMikdash, he needs to tell it to you for Shmiras HaMikdash. Once he said it for this, it's obvious that it applies to Shmiras HaMikdash as well. And then he says, not only it's because these two are similar and parallel, in fact, we should think about this in a way of a Kal V'chomer. Why? Moira, a mikdash, is only an asay. But the Torah says, mikdashi tiro, is worded as a positive commandment. You should have reverence for the Beis Hamikdash, is only an asay. There's no lois asay. When it comes to the chiyuv to do shmiras hamikdash, to put the honor guard there, so it turns out that there's an asay and a lois asay. Why? Because on Parshas Kairach, it uses the words vishamru, and we have this tradition that when the Torah says a commandment with the word shmira involved, even if it uses positive language of you shall, but if baked into the language you have shmira, then we have a messiah that it's a lav. And so therefore, for shmiras hamikdash we have an asay and a lav. A lav is much more chamor than just an asay. So it goes like this: Ma doch moira hamikdash, and which is only an asay, and af al bikein it's noyig bezman hazeh. How much more so kavod hamikdash, honor guard of the mikdash, which is an asay and a lois asay. Certainly, it should be active and something that we're considering bisman hazeh. This is the argument that he makes over here. Now we reach one problem, though. The problem is that we're not allowed to go on Har HaBayis when we're not tar, we're not allowed to go in certain sections of Har HaBayis. So how are you going to do the Shmira? The Shmira, the Mishnah and the Gemara tell us how the people were stationed, and so how are you going to do it? It was all on Har HaBayis. There was no Shmira off Har HaBayis. It's very, very clear in the sources. All the Shmira happened on Har HaBayis. So he says this is not a problem. Why is it not a problem? Points to the Gemara in Tamid, Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, where the Gemara in Tamid discusses the following. The teaching is that in the Azara, there were some guards that were inside the Azara, and then there were some guards that were outside the Beis Hamikdash, but on Har HaBayis. So it's interesting. Those who were guarding the Azara weren't inside the Azara; they were outside the Azara. They were called guards of the Azara, but they stood outside the Azara. Then the positions of the Har HaBayis, they would stand inside the Har HaBayis. So let's take an example. One of the places the Shoimrim would stand, there were designated places. One of the places to stand is the corners, the pinos, and the other is by doors. So let's take doors, for example. There's a door for the Azara. You can stand inside, on the inside part of the door. You can stand outside. Same thing for Har HaBayis. You can stand inside, you can stand outside. So the Gemara says that when it comes to the Azara, you stood outside the door. When it comes to Har HaBayis, they stood inside. So the Gemara asks the question, why? How come the Har HaBayis they do on the inside? And how come the Azara they would stand outside? Amri, so the answer is as follows. Har HaBayis, the guards on the Har HaBayis, the itama, if you got tired, uboy mesav, and you wanted to sit, Yosef, there is no problem. And so therefore, Amrina Mitoicha, we say it makes sense. There's no reason why it shouldn't be on the inside. Stand on Har HaBayis, you're walking around, you get tired, pull out a folding chair, and have a seat, no problem. But Azara, we don't want you standing inside. Why? The itama, if you get tired, uvoy lemesav, and you want to sit down, loy matzi yasiv, you're not allowed to sit down, because you're not allowed to sit down in the Azara, and it's normal for guards to want to take a break and to sit down, and to therefore Amrina mibachut, so therefore we say it belongs outside. Says Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel, hold on a second. You're going to tell me that Shmira could only be on Har HaBayis, then what was the Gemara's question? The Gemara's question was, how come the Azara, they stood outside, and the Har HaBayis, they stood inside? What do you mean? Har HaBayis, you have to be inside. If you go outside, you're not on the mountain. You're not on the mountain, it's not a Shmira. So what's the Gemara's question? Elamai, what do you see from here? You see that the Shmira could be both ways. It could be inside and could be outside, which is why the Gemara says, how come the Har HaBayis sits inside and not outside? It's a valid question. It could be in both places. And then we come with an answer. So therefore, what do you see from here? He says, you see from here that obviously it's better if the Shmira could be on Har HaBayis. But if you can't do Shmira on Har HaBayis because you can't go up, so that's fine. You do it under Har HaBayis. So what do you do? You go to the corners and you put people there. You go to the Sha'arim. You identify where the Sha'arim of the Har HaBayis are. And he says we could identify this today because already in previous centuries there was a sefer called Kafter V'Ferach that was put out during the times of the Balei HaTosos. There was a Yid from France, Ishteri HaParchi. He made a aliyah and went to Eretz Yisrael. He was very interested in the subject of Har HaBayis and the Beis Hamikdash, and he tracked where the gates of the Har HaBayis were, where they would have been. And so Hillel Moshe Meshel says, we know where the gates of Har HaBayis were. No one could go inside, we'll stay outside, and also on the corners. We should be putting up an honor guard there, and that is the central argument that he has in his Sefer Mishkanos La'avir Yaakov, which, as I said, is about the Beis Hamikdash. This was his argument. As far as we can tell, for the entire duration of Golos, this is the first person to really emphasize this idea and to talk about this idea and propagate this idea, and definitely to write and to publish and to advocate on behalf of this idea. Well, in order for this to happen, obviously, he's going to need to have support. He's going to need to have other Rabbanim who are going to say, you know something, he's right, this is a good idea. There's the local Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael that he needs to get their support. And there's also the foreign Rabbanim that live in other countries that he wants to get their support. But for him, it didn't really go too well. Meaning, he didn't get the support he had hoped to get. So, for example, he sent a letter to the Avnei Nezer. The Avnei Nezer was an important person for him because the Avnei Nezer is the Rebbe of Sachachav. He was an Edom of Reb Menachem Mendel of Kotsk. This Hillel Moshe Meshel, I mentioned he was by the Tzemach Tzedek, but before that and after that, he was by the Kotzker. So this is an important person in his in his history. And Avnei Nezer was a huge Paisik. They're mamish around the same age. Avnei Nezer was born and passed away, both born and passed away around the same time. They were both born in the 1830s, passed away around 1910, both of them. So he writes to Avnei Nezer a letter and says, here's my proposal, sending him the material that we were just reading. What do you have to say about this idea? So here's an overview of what Avnei Nezer had to say. He didn't come out, it's important to note, he didn't come out like, enraged by the idea. It's a very measured tshuva, but in the end you're going to see that he's unable to provide his support for this idea. So there's 5 or 6 points that we're going to take from the tshuva of the Avnei Nezer, which summarizes all of the central ideas. So idea number 1, look at number 9. You wanted, he says, to make a hekesh and a kal v'chomer from the mitzvah of Beis Hamikdash. He said, well, Beis Hamikdash is still active today, so Shmiras HaMikdash should still be active today. And then you turned it not only into a hekesh, comparing, you turned it into a kal v'chomer, saying that it's like ma'adach, because we also have a lois haseh. He says, Avnei Nezer says, I want to ask you a question. When you learn Chazal, when you learn Gemara, you're used to seeing the Tanoim, the Amoraim, introduce or talk about, mostly Tanoim, kal v'chomers and Gzeira Shavas. Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Do you ever see a Rishon say, oh, what's the din about something? I don't know. You know what? Here's a hekesh, and so the din, and then offer a hekesh. You ever see that? A Gzeira Shava? No, you don't see. A kal v'chomer, very, very, definitely from one mitzvah to another mitzvah, making these types of limudim is unusual. Why? There's a reason for that. That is, there's a whole science to how the Yud Gimel Midrash Torah and Drashas B'hem worked, how they operated. How are you able to kind of derive laws in these ways of kal v'chomer, Gzeira Shava, Binyanav, all of the Yud Gimel Midrash Torah and Drashas B'hem, and there are more than 13. There's also Ribui. You ever see a Rav give a psak din based on an extra word in the Torah? It's unheard of, right? This is the science of the Tanoim and Amoraim, and we lost this art. It's very interesting. It could be that it had to do with the smicha. If you had smicha, the real smicha, going back to Moshe, then you could be involved in this science. With bittul smicha, it could be that this also went away. And so therefore, you don't have a right to do this. You have 2 separate mitzvahs here. They're not one mitzvah. 2 separate mitzvahs, and you're going to start telling me that this one is active as a hekesh and a kal v'chomer because another one is active. This is not the way us rabbanim have been dealing with halacha for the last many centuries. That's the first point that the Avnei Nezer makes. Then he says as follows. And then he says, now you wanted to say, okay, but min hasvara, because it's about the Shekhinah, and the Shekhinah is there forever, so therefore the mitzvah should be there today. Guess what he says? If you look in the Sefer HaChinuch, you'll see the Sefer HaChinuch and Mitzvah Shin Peiches says the mitzvah zeh noihegas bizman habayis. Clear source, a Rishon, who clearly negates what you're saying the mitzvah is only bizman habayis. Why? Why is the mitzvah only bizman habayis? He says this makes a lot of sense. Because even though it is true, he says, that it's not like we're afraid that pirates are coming, robbers are coming to steal. Fine. So it's an honor guard. But still, an honor guard needs an object to guard. You still need to guard something. There needs to be something there for you to be guarding. So I'm not afraid that you're going to steal the Aron, but I guard the Aron. And so he says, what do you have? We don't have the Beis Hamikdash, and we don't have the Kalim there today for you to guard. So what are you guarding? Yes, I agree with you. It's about the honor, and we're not worried people coming to run away, coming to take things. But at the end of the day, there needs to be, I am guarding over something. What is the over that you're guarding? You're guarding Shekhinah? That's not a physical thing that physical human beings do. You guard something tangible. You guard something that theoretically could be taken away. And so therefore he says, that's the svara of the Sefer HaChinuch, of why it's not noig, and so therefore he feels, the Avnei Nezer does, that he's really undermining the central idea that Hillel Moshe Meshel wants to do. However, the Avnei Nezer comes back and says, one second, there is still one way I think we could save your idea and we could save your proposal. And that is, maybe we should think about this Shmira in a different way. I know that the Rambam provided the model of kavod, but what if and you thought that that's good news, because it's covered for the Shekhinah is still there today, so let's guard it today. I came back to you and I said, that's bad news. Why? Because you watch over something physical that's there is nothing that's physical there, and so that Rambam's model isn't going to work. But what if we suggest, and there are other poskim that say, the Shmira is about human to human. And that is human beings who stand there and say, by the way, you're a zar, you're not allowed to go here. Or by the way, you're tamei, you're not allowed to go here. So it's about making sure that people don't walk into places that they're not allowed. If you say that's what it is, says Avnei Nezer in number 11, that's taka shayich today. And then he says as follows. Now you're going to say, what are you going to do? You're going to set up a force in Yerushalayim. Who are they going to talk to? The Yidden. The non-Jews are still going there. So it's going to look funny. You're going to say, Yid, hey, you got to stop, right? And you're doing your job, but the non-Jews are still going for their prayers or whatever they're doing over there. He says, no, it's not a problem. Why is it not a problem? He says, because the din of Tumah by Goyim is actually not Minat Torah. So you end up having a very interesting thing. Minat Torah for a non-Jew to walk on Makam HaMikdash is not as chamor as for a Yid. So therefore you are achieving something. If you achieved that no Yid were to go up on the Makam HaMikdash and you were warning all of them and you understand the Shmira in this way, so then he thinks it's not such a terrible idea. Maybe this would be a valid path to think about it. Okay, so now we should feel optimistic. Hillel Moshe, you can imagine if Hillel Moshe is reading this, he's like, okay, so we have an out. We have a way, not the way I originally envisioned it, but we have a derech to be mechadish this mitzvah zman hazeh, even according to the Avnei Nezer. Said the Avnei Nezer, no. Why? Two problems. Number one, in the Shmira, you had Kohanim and Leviim. Why Kohanim? Kohanim were in some places that Leviim weren't allowed to enter, and they needed Shmira, so the Kohanim would do that job. So Kohanim, he says, not shaykh to do Shmira at all. Why? Because for a Kohen, it's part of his avodah. And if it's part of your avodah, you're not allowed to do it when you're tamei meis. A kohen who's tamei meis, who does avodah, is a serious lav. And because that is the case, and because for the kohen it's an avodah, and we're all tamei meis today, so cancel that. So kohenim are out. What about Leviim? Leviim don't have this limitation. Leviim don't have this issue. Obviously, a Levi who's tamei can't go in a place where a person who's tamei can't go. But a Levi could do theoretically his job of Shmira, even when he's Tamei, if he doesn't go to a place where he's not allowed to go. Says Avnei Nezer, I have a different problem with this. What's the problem with this? We have a Gemara that tells us, some Psukim that tell us, that David and Shmuel set up the Leviim, and they designated which families are the Shoyarim, the gate, the ones who stood at the gates, which is Shmira, and who are the Meshayrim, who are the ones that would sing. And the Gemara says a very interesting thing. Gemara in Erchin says, Meshayrer sheshir b'misa. A meshayrer, one who's designated to be a singer, if he changes over and he guards, that's a chiyuv misa. So that's a lav. I don't fully understand what's the big deal, but this is what you have over here. We have this din that we can't just swap around. There needs to be a seder in the Beis Hamikdash. Says Avnei Nezer, you're a Levi today. Do you know if you come from the families that are the shoyarim, or versus the ones that are the meshayrim? And we can't play around over here because it seems like it's a serious thing, that it's rigid. That if you're a singer, you're a singer, and if you're a guardian, then you're a guardian. Man, when Mashiach comes, Mashiach could change it. He doesn't see a problem with that. David and Shmuel instituted it one way, Mashiach could change it. But till then, it hasn't been changed. We don't have a right to come and mess around with this. And so therefore, the Leviim can't do it. And so therefore, V'i Efshar Lakayim Mitzvah Shmira Bizman Hazeh, Gam B'Leviim Bizman Hazeh, and so therefore, we cannot do it. And so it's like a tshuva that goes with a few twists and turns, and at a certain point, you maybe, as you're reading this, Rabbi Hillel Moshe Meshel is hopeful that maybe there's some promise here that we're going to be able to do this mitzvah Shmira B'Mikdash, but at the end of the day, the Avnei Nezer has a discussion. He doesn't say this is a crazy idea. He doesn't say it's outrageous. He doesn't say, Milchama, we have to go to war against you. He doesn't say any of that. But we do see that he's not able to come to support Rabbi Hillel Moshe Meshel in this regard. There were other Rabbanim at the time who were much more passionately against this idea, who thought that this is dangerous and this is terrible and whatever it is. But rather than giving a contemporary of his, I want to bring from the Munkatcher. The Munkatcher lived after. Munkatcher passed away in the 1930s, so he's a little younger than Rabbi Hillel Moshe Meshel, and he wrote a sefer that's called Oilas Tamid. And Oilas Tamid, he published this in 1922, and this sefer Oilas Tamid is his commentary on Maseches Tamid in Yonei Beis Hamikdash, and the Munkatcher points to two texts. Let's see these two texts. First is the Mishnah, the very opening line, the Mishnah Maseches Tamid says as follows: Three places, the Kohanim, I mentioned before, the Kohanim had to guard, I think there were 24 places, something like that. So 3 of them are for the Kohanim because a Levi can't go there. What's his deal going to be? Beis Hamikdash. It has to be in the Beis Hamikdash, not b'makom Hamikdash, Beis Hamikdash. That's going to be a big deal for the Munkatcher. And then the second text that he's going to rely on is the Rambam in Hilchos Beis HaBchira, Perek Ches Halacha Aleph, who says as follows: Shmiras Hamikdash is a mitzvah saseh. Guarding the Mikdash is a mitzvah. Even though we're not afraid of thieves, doesn't matter. It's still a mitzvah saseh. She'ein shmiraseh ala kavalah. It's about the honor. And then the Rambam says the following line: Ein a doima palterin sheyesh alav shomrin lepalterin she'ein alav shomrin. You can't compare a palace that has guards to a palace that doesn't have guards. What's the Munkatcher going to do this? A palace. You need to have a palace. That's the deal. Let's read him inside. Zok the Munkatcher over here in Oilas Tamid. Hine pashut melashon ha-Mishnah v'Gemara. It's obvious from the language of the Mishnah and the language of the Gemara. Ki bebeis hamikdash dafka. You need to have the Beis Hamikdash. Then hayu mechiyavim b'shmirasei. Then you're obligated to do this shmira. In other words, you don't even have to get into a conversation of why is this shmira. Is this shmira for the purpose of honor? And are we honoring the Shekhinah? Are we honoring the... You don't even have to go to the conversation. Look at the language of how the statute is written. The statute says that when you have the building, you do the Shmirah. And that's the end of story. Ubiyarti lezeh, and I have to explain this, gam l'roi pshitusa, even though it's so obvious, there was a rabbi, and he says his name, who printed in Yerushalayim, v'hirish olam, and he made a shturim, shetzrichin gamata shmira saviv harabayis, that we need to have shmira today around harabayis. Ein tzarech lefal po la'alacha bedavar. We don't have to even get involved in a deep discussion here, dimei karei lasa, because there is no standing, there is no issue here. Why? The talei mitzazu rak bepalterin. You need to have the palace, you need to have the palterin. Ba'oidei banoi, avoloi kishe'ein sham ha-palterin. Not when you don't have the palterin. Just for example, just like you would say about the kalim of the Beis Hamikdash. The kalim of the Beis Hamikdash, you need to have the building. When you have the building, you have the kalim. So al derech zeh is benegei the shmira. That's the way he understands it. Now he says, hold on a second. Why are you getting all sort of? Why am I getting? You see, his language is he's harsher. He's more worried about this. He has strong language, and you'll see a little more soon. Obviously, first of all, that's the way the Munkatcher, his personality was more. He was more passionate. But also, secondly, he was concerned during his life about. He was very strongly against Zionism. And anything that would have been used or could have been used as we're redoing Eretz Yisrael, bringing back the old, anything Beis Hamikdash related is something he would have been very, very cautious about. And this is what we're seeing over here. What do you care? Let's be machmer. It's a good question. Let's listen to Rabbi Hillel Moshe Meshel. Let's put guards out there. What's the problem? What's the chsaron? What do you do? It's not like you didn't violate any Isser by putting Yiddelach stationed around. Be cute, be nice. Tourists will come, take pictures with them. It could be a nice thing, could be a cute thing. Why? It's not a stringency. This, in fact, is the opposite of a stringency. Excuse me, based tfilasam tumasam shalai yishmaelim. It's going to look like you're setting up an honor guard for a house of worship of Islam. And so therefore, this is not a good idea. Although we know and we heard that this rabbi was a gadol b'teira v'chasid gadol, so he's a very important man. Sorry, he took it way too far over here. This is not okay. This is a very interesting line. When you read his books, you see it's messy, and it's true. His form are not easy to read at all. It's hard to know where he's coming and where he's going, and it's very complicated. These books are very, very hard to follow. He's saying the average reader can tell that he's a bissel farmished. This is what he's saying. Let him have his thing. Let his memory be for a blessing. His neshama is in Gan Eden. We're following in the ways of our ancestors. We're not reinstituting this thing which hasn't been done. There's no record of this happening ever since the time of Churban Beis Hamikdash. This is a small taste of opposition that Rabbi Hillel Moshe Meshel faced. There was much more, a small taste. And obviously, he responded. And that's what his sefer is. His sefer is his initial writing, the letters he wrote to the Rabbanim, the answers that Rabbanim gave him, his replies to them, and then hashlomis, the things that he missed out, which is, again, why it's not a very organized sefer. But that's what his sefer is. And all of the issues that we're discussing over here today. So, for example, is it considered an avodah? Is Shemitah considered an avodah and therefore you can't do it with your tamei? That's a halachic discussion, a debate. Is it true that a Levi can't switch over from one job to another? Also, discussion, debate. What the Munkatcher is saying here, you dafka need to have the Beis Hamikdash and without, discussion, debate. All of these things are widely discussed by many of the poskim then and up until this day. Now, he wanted to get support from as many people as possible. And as a result, we want to talk about the following. There was a chassid, a Chabad chassid who lived in Yerushalayim, whose name was Reb Doiv Ber Sheinin. Doiv Ber Sheinin grew up in Eastern Europe, in Moilov, and later he went to Eretz Yisrael. He passed away in 1884. His name features in the Sefer, and when his name comes up, it mentions that he's been chazan in Chassidus Dach for 50 years. Okay. Chashva Yid in Yerushalayim, Chashva Chabad chassid in Yerushalayim. In the Sefer, a Mishkan Slaver Yaakov, there's letters printed by him. One, he has Doiv Ber Sheinin, he asked him, please write a letter endorsing my work and what I'm doing. And Doiv Ber Sheinin wrote a letter. So this letter is addressed to Klal Yisrael, and it reads as follows. It's just one interesting line that I want to point to, and then leading into the second letter, which is the main thing. In the first letter, he writes as follows. If God is going to help Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel, this is going to be the beginning of the Gula. All right, here we need to talk about this. Hillel Moshe Meshel, numerous times, talks about this, that we need to do this mitzvah. But he also talks about it as a trigger that could bring the Gula. That somehow there are sources indicating that if we do this act of Shmiras HaMikdash, then we're going to have the Gula. And this is something that's come up in numerous shurim, where you have an impulse, la'irich, almost kol hadoros, where certain Gedolei Yisrael would say, we need to start what I would call a Geula Dika institution in order to jumpstart the Geula process. This could come across by, we need to take Eretz Yisrael, we need to build a Beis Hamikdash, we need to start Karbanis, we need to do Shmiras Hamikdash, Tchelas. There are many different things that have been long associated with the Gula, and then you'll have people bringing sources say that if we start it now, then that's going to bring the Gula in. And Hillel Moshe Meshel writes this, and this chassid Beryl Sheinin is writing about this in his letter of endorsement. What's going to happen is we're going to get Eretz Yisrael, v'yivana lanu es Beis HaBchira, we're going to get the Beis Hamikdash, ma'at yar lanu mitay chashecha al pi derech hateva. It's going to be a slow, incremental process of Geula in a natural way. This is very interesting, a huge debate about is the Geula a very slow process al pi tava, which an issue that came to the fore with Zionism, or is it a Geula Nisis? And here we see that for at least this particular chassid, he felt that this idea of starting Shemiras HaMikdash was a step in the process of a natural Geula that could bring the Aschalta de Geula and then eventually the full Geula. The reason I'm bringing it here is it's because it seems to me this Hillel Moshe Meshel is also a worldview, because in his Sefer numerous times he makes these allusions. Otherwise I wouldn't have cited it, but I think it fills out the picture for what's going on in terms of the primary hero of today's shir, of Hillel Moshe Meshel. But the main reason why I'm bringing it up Beryl Sheinin is because he wrote a second letter. Right after the main letter, he writes a second letter. Look, let's read. Igeres sheshalach harav chassid amiti anal, the Beryl Sheinin, laharabanim hu bnei Admar Milubavitch, the sons of the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek passed away in Tavresh Chavav, 1866. This we know is about 10 years later. If you look at the letters and you see the dates, you can date it. It's about 10 years later. 10 years later, Hillel Moshe Meshel wants an endorsement from Chabad. Who's Chabad today? Bnei Tzemach Tzedek. So we need a letter from Bnei Tzemach Tzedek. So how am I going to get it? Beryl Sheinin is the star Chabad chassid in Eretz Yisrael. So he is going to write a letter to Bnei Tzemach Tzedek. Let's see what the letter says. Here's a part of the letter. I found this special man, Hillel Moshe Meshel. Look at this. From heaven, they're giving him they're giving him a lot of remazim of Torah. You're going to see he's sending you his pamphlets of his writing. When you read it, what are you going to see? Rabbi Maharash, Maharil, other brothers of the Reb Marash, sons of the Tzemach Tzedek, you're going to be able to see this material is Ruach HaKodesh. Ulefi kat sichli, the way I see it, ain't divrei atzmai. This is not this man speaking. No human being could comprehend these ideas. It's all min hashamayim. It's a big mitzvah for the helpers. It's a big mitzvah for all of us to realize his idea of mishmaros, of guarding the Beis Hamikdash. Especially now, according to the rumors, we could buy a property by Kaisal Maravi at the northern side, and that's taka one of the places we need to have the mishmaros. We buy the house and we put Yidden in there, so then by definition we're already doing the mitzvah. And obviously buying real estate, Ottoman Empire, controlling Yerushalayim, this was complicated stuff. The rumor is that now we have the ability, taka, to buy this property. So everyone needs to support Hillel Moshe Meshel. And then he's writing more about Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel. It's a letter of endorsement. It's like a cover letter. He was, by the way, he was by the Tzemach Tzedek. He was by your father. I'm asking all of you to look into what he's writing with an open eye. Now he says, that doesn't mean you have to agree with everything he wrote. Maybe you're going to want to argue with something, but at least give it a serious look. And from this, you'll come to the truth. Well, what happened? There was no letter of endorsement that came, not from the Reb Marash, and not from any of his particular brothers. What do we see from here, by the way? We see from this, Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel was not known by the brothers. If he was known by the children of the Tzemach Tzedek, there would have been no need for this type of letter. The reason this is important is because when they republished this book in 1972, they wrote a little biography of Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel, and they write that when he came to Lubavitch, he was there for 6 months, and it says he learned with the Tzemach Tzedek bechavrusa every day, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Reb Marash, and Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel. It also says that the Rebbe of the Tzemach Tzedek was mekarev him b'kirvi yisera. Now I ask you, if this happened for 6 months, so then when he leaves, and he goes to Eretz Yisrael, he needs to have someone else, Berel Sheinin, write a letter of endorsement on his behalf, and to let them know that, by the way, he was in Lubavitch. It's very unreasonable. So I'm not sure where that information comes, but it's unreasonable. Yes, he was in Lubavitch. That's very clear. In fact, there's a bichol chassidus of Maimarim that are written by him. He's a big Talmud Chacham, a big chassid, and all that. But I think they took it a little too far when they tried making those suggestions. The bottom line is, he did not get the Haskamah from the children of the Tzemach Tzedek. But one second, he doesn't need Haskamah from the children of the Tzemach Tzedek, because let's remember the beginning of the Shir. He has Haskamah from the Tzemach Tzedek himself. Or does he? So let's read what is the nature of this Haskamah from the Tzemach Tzedek himself. Right after he writes, here is the Haskamah, he explains what this Haskamah is. And here he writes this long, long Megillah. It's presented on the page in Hebrew. I am going to just read it in English, but follow along with me as we're going through it. In the year 1884, a man came to me here. Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel was talking. A man came to me here in Eretz HaKodesh. He is an older individual, and he is a Levi. And he told me, Stam Azai, that the main reason why he came here is because in the year 1857, he was in Lubavitch by the Tzemach Tzedek for a certain reason. Will become later, for a certain reason. And when he gave the Tzemach Tzedek the note with his name and his mother's name, asking the Tzemach Tzedek that he daven for him, the Tzemach Tzedek asked him, are you a Levi? And he said, yeah. But he had failed to write in his note that he's a Levi. Said the Tzemach Tzedek to him, I have a certain shlichus that I cannot give to any person because of a secret reason. But I can give it to you because of a great mitzvah that you did. And be very careful not to tell anyone about this, only to the person to whom I'm directing you to give this shlichus, to give this message to. And now the Tzemach Tzedek started talking to him in Ruach HaKodesh. And the Tzemach Tzedek said, there's going to be a time that you're going to be in Yerushalayim around the years 1881, 1882, 1883, 1884, Tafresh Mem Aleph, Mem Beis, Mem Gimel, and Mem Daled. Remember, this man met Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel in Tafresh Mem Daled. And when the Tzemach Tzedek said the year Tafresh Mem Aleph, he let out a deep sigh. And we all know what that is, that Rabbi Moshe Meshel says, because there were mass pogroms broke out in Russia after Tsar Alexander was assassinated, and there was maybe like one Jew loosely, I think like the getaway of where they went, there was one Jew who was associated, so they blamed it all on the Jews, and mass pogroms broke out in Russia, Ukraine, and these were big tzaras for Yidden, and so the Tzemach Tzedek, seeing this, gives out a deep sign of pain. Okay, so anyway, you're going to be in Yerushalayim in those years, and you shall look out a person who is Mem Hey Beis Reish Tzadik, Moshe Hillel ben Reb Tzvi. The problem is his name is Hillel Moshe, but that's the way it's printed in the book. You're going to look for this particular individual. And in 1884, you're going to get to know him really well and tell him everything that you hear from me now. He was by me a few years ago, meaning in 1853. He was here. He didn't have a beard yet. And this is going to be the siman that this is true. In other words, when you tell him you were in Lubavitch and you didn't have a beard, then that's going to be the siman that you are indeed the shliach. Okay. Now, what does he need to tell him? He says as follows. Tell him, number one, he's going to be mechadish, secrets in Torah. And when the Yidden are going to listen to his voice, Oz Yitzmach HaYeshua, then the redemption is going to come. Okay, so the idea of linking this mitzvah and reinstituting this mitzvah to the idea of it initiating the Gula, you see here in this Ruach HaKodesh from the Tzemach Tzedek. Number two, tell him that he should learn the teachings of the Zohar and the Arizal, generally, especially the teachings of the Zohar and the Arizal that are based on Parshas Shmos and Parshas Vayikra in the Zohar through Daf Yud Gimel, and then he's going to understand exactly what I mean when he looks in these sources. This is not the only place where Hillel Moshe Meshel tells us his story. He tells us elements of this story in two other places of his writings, and in one of them, the Shliach says, how in the world am I going to remember Zohar Daf Yud Gimel? So the Tzemach Tzedek says, you have a son, your son turned bar mitzvah in Tafresh Yud Gimel, and so 13 in the year Tafresh Yud Gimel, that's the siman, that's how you're going to remember Zohar Daf Yud Gimel. Okay. Also, there's the 49 days of Sefirah. There's a lot of Kabbalistic secrets about that. Tell him to look into that subject. Number 4, tell him, hey Teves, listen to this, hey Teves, he's going to understand what I'm talking about, associated with the day hey Teves. Number 5, oh no, this is not number 5. And then what happened is, the man told me that the end of the story, that before he left the Tzemach Tzedek, he said, Rebbe, please bench me. And the Tzemach Tzedek gave him a bracha and said, you're going to be successful in my shlichus, and you're going to do avodas halavim in the Beis Hamikdash. And this is pretty much what the man said. It was difficult for us to believe this man. So he got up and he swore in front of the Aron Kodesh on Erev Yom Kippur that he's saying the truth. So wow, is this conversation happened on Erev Yom Kippur? I don't know, it's a little odd for this conversation to have happened on Erev Yom Kippur, but this is what it says here. Okay, now Hillel Moshe Meshel takes, okay, this got to be true. So I start thinking about all the things that I'm hearing from my Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. And I realize that he figured out, Beruach HaKodesh, that I am going to be mechadish, the idea of bringing back Avodas Halavim. Because I looked at all the sources, and I realized that all these sources talk about bringing back Shmiras HaMikdash. For example, Zohar in the beginning of Parshas Vayikra, page 1 and page 2, talks about the secret Kabbalistic meanings of Shmiras HaMikdash. And the biggest sign of all is Hey Teves. Why Hey Teves, he says? Because I was going through my manuscripts, and I wrote Chidushim on Maseches Brachos, and I wrote a Chidush on Maseches Brachos about Shmiras HaMikdash, and I looked, and I found that the date of that Chiddush that I had on Maseches Brachos about Shmiras HaMikdash was none other than Hey Teves, toward the end of the day in the year Tafresh Mem Beis, and so I know that this is also part of that sign. And so I realize this is true, but I don't want anyone to laugh at me. So therefore, I'm bringing in witnesses. And he brings this shliach, he says, in front of 7 people, and he has 7 names in the Sefer that say they heard what this man had to say. They don't say exactly what he said. It's Hillel Moshe Meshel reporting what this man said, and it's endorsed, notarized by 7 individuals who are mentioned by name over there. Then the narrative continues, that this man says that it was the month of Tafresh Mem Aleph, And the Tzemach Tzedek came to him in a dream, three separate dreams, which has more halachic significance, and said, you're still in Chutz La'aretz, go to Yerushalayim to do the shlichus that I gave you so many years earlier. And he got afraid, and he right away traveled. So what took so long from Tafresh Mamalef to Tafresh? Why didn't he find me for 3 years? Because everyone in Yerushalayim calls me Meshel. And he heard from the Tzemach Tzedek Moshe Hillel or Hillel Moshe. He never heard Meshel. Then he was in Shul. He heard me getting an aliyah, and they called Ya'amei, the Hillel Moshe, and they didn't say Meshel, it's a verstanden. Oh, this is the person who it is, and that's how he figured it out. And then he fills in another piece over here. Why did this Yid get this shlichus? So he said, the Tzemach Tzedek said, you have a big schus, and this is why I can give you this shlichus. So he says here at the end, he adds this. I don't know why this is like the witnesses are in between. It's a little odd, but so much about this is a little odd. He says as follows. The Tzemach Tzedek said, tell me something good that you did. And no, not that, no, not that, no, not that. Oh, that story. What happened? It was the year 1853, and there was a war in Crimea, in the area of Sevastopol. And there was a Jew that ended up being killed and buried in a mass grave together with non-Jews. I found out about it, and I went there. It was 120 people. We figured out al pi siman who is the Yid. We went to the minister or the general. We got permission. We exhumed the Yid, and we buried him in Kever Yisrael. Tzemach Tzedek said, there you go. That's the schos, which is why you are the shliach to deliver this amazing thing. And the name of the Yid who was in this mass grave, who was saved, was Reb Aryeh ben Yaakov. This is the Haskamah that we have from the Hillel Moshe Meshel. So it's obviously a wild story. It's obviously not a typical Haskamah. And now the question is, how are we supposed to think about this? So the good news is that we have material from the Rebbe on this subject. So let's have a look at what the Rebbe said about this subject. So there's a shliach in Massachusetts, Rabbi Herschel Fogelman, and in the years 1943 and 1947, he was a shliach in Buffalo. And at a Farbrengen in 770, Chav Chasivan Tafshin Mem Vav, was a Mitzvah Shabbos, he was saying stories of what happened in the early years of the rebbes and siyas, and he said the following story, and it was published in a tzura that was given out the next year, Chav Chasivan Tafshin Mem Zayin. The story, he says, is as follows. I was in Buffalo in those years, 43, 47, and I found the Sefer Mishkanei Laver Yaakov, talking about Shmiras Beis Hamikdash. At the end of the book, the author writes a whole story of dreams about the Tzemach Tzedek, and he mentions the Kotzker here as well. I wanted to know, is this true? So I sent the Sefer to the Rebbe. The Rebbe looked at the Sefer, it's before the Rebbe's Nesiyas, and when the Rebbe finished, he said, the Rebbe Marash said about this Mechaber, Shehu Achsidisha Baldimyan, that he is a Chassidisha, he has an imagination. A Chassidisha person with an imagination. Number one. Number two, there's a letter of the Rebbe in Tafshin Tezvav to Rabbi Greenglass. In fact, when they printed the Igros Kodesh Tafshin Tezvav, they didn't print this letter. Rabbi Simpson, when he would give the letters to be published in the Igros, he was very conservative of not giving things that are sensitive, and so this letter wasn't published. But it was, because it was Rabbi Greenglass, it was in Rabbi Greenglass's archive, so it was published in Sadik Lamelech. And that's how we have the letter, and later was printed in Igros Kodesh Chelech Chav Aleph. About the Mechaber, talking about this author, Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel, I'm sure you saw the Rebbe writes his Sefer Mishkanei Aver Yaakov. Uboy Sipurim Avhilim, shocking stories that are there. All right, shocking stories. Chassidisha Baldimyan is a good shidduch over here. The Rebbe writes as follows. A few years ago, I was shown this Sefer that just happened to come to me. I showed this Sefer that happened to come to me to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and from his words, mitoich dvarev hevanti as von der Mechaber ham nit kan halten in Lubavitch. In Lubavitch, I didn't really appreciate this author. I don't exactly know. It could be this is the Fogelman story. It could be Fogelman brings him the Sefer, and it's at that point that he has the conversation with the Frierdiker Rebbe. Okay, so yeah, you could imagine. I don't know exactly what happened in Lubavitch, but now it's all of a sudden it's not a surprise. It's not a surprise that he didn't get his Haskamah from Bnei Tzemach Tzedek. If in Lubavitch they didn't really think highly of him, and generally they wouldn't get involved in these types of things. But how much more so that they didn't have a high regard for him, as man nit gehalten von Lubavitch. So okay, so we understand why they wouldn't have answered. And maybe, building on the theme of Chassidus Baal Dimyon, maybe if I'm not going to get the Haskamah from Bnei Tzamach Tzedek, I'll get the Haskamah. I don't need Bnei Tzamach Tzedek. I'll get Haskamah from the Tzamach Tzedek Alei. And he got somehow through his imagination, he got Haskamah from the Tzamach Tzedek Alei. Now here's the amazing thing. Even though this kind of would lead you to say, maybe we should cancel this whole project, we find by the Rebbe, beferish nicht. Beferish not canceling this whole project. The Rebbe spoke about the mitzvah of Beis Hamikdash in Tafshin Lamed Beis. And the Rebbe wasn't talking about whether it's there bisman hazeh. It was more a conversation of what is the exact nature and geder of this mitzvah. And along the way, the Rebbe said on Shabbos Parshas Mishpatim as follows: Letztens habe ich hereingeguckt in a Sefer, was wird angerufen b'shem Mishkanes Lavir Yaakov. I recently looked in the Sefer. Das hat geschrieben in einer, was weiß, da ist gewesen ein größer Chassid. No problem, you can call him a Chassid, right? Es ist euch da a Sefer von der Mooncatcher. Eulas Tamid, the Mooncatcher, writes against him. Macht von dem ganzen Sturm, kedarke, besufel vesada, und fragt up the ganze, the Mooncatcher gets agitated by the whole thing. Says the Rebbe. Aber nicht alles, was fragt, is muchrig. Not all of the questions of the Rebbe held very highly of the Mooncatcher. Not all of the Mooncatcher's questions are so persuasive. I think Mishkanes Lavir Yaakov, Hillel Moshe Meshel's arguments, the Rebbe thinks they're persuasive. Yeah, you can have both of these at the same time. There's two parts of this. One is the halachic arguments in the Sefer. The other is that the Tzamach Tzedek gave Haskamah to the Sefer. These are two separate things. And the Rebbe seems to have an inclination to say that some of his arguments are reasonable. The Rebbe wasn't meidech on it. It was derech haga very, very quickly. But then we come to Shmini Tafshin Nun. Shmini Tafshin Nun, Shabbos Parsha Shmini Tafshin Nun. The Rambam of that day was the perek that talks about Shminas Hamikdash. And the Rebbe's, the whole sikha is about this mitzvah. And it's so long that I can't bring the whole thing, but I made a summary of the points. Let me tell you what we're going to find when we read it. The Rebbe goes point by point as endorsing ideas, echoing ideas from Hillel Moshe Meshel in the Mishkanes Lavir Yaakov. Let's have a look. The Rebbe begins this sikha by saying that Kavod HaMikdash has nothing to do with the building of the Beis Hamikdash. It's the Shechina. That's not the Avnei Nezer. That's not the Mooncatcher. Both of them said it's the building. No, it has to do with the Shechina. B'negei the Shechina, the Rebbe says it's not bottle. And that's how we see Taka in the Rambam, that you're able to bring karbanis even without the Beis Hamikdash. That was a point that Hillel Moshe Meshel made. Number 3, the Rebbe says, this mitzvah Shmiras Habayis is in all times, even today. The Rebbe brings Lahoyer from the Lashon of the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos, where the Rambam says, Va'ad le'ol me'ad. That was a diak Hillel Moshe Meshel made. The Rebbe adds, especially considering this a different point, that we have a tradition that the Aron and other artifacts in the Beis Hamikdash were buried there by Makam Hamikdash. So even if you want to say you need the Kalim, you have some Kalim there today. Number 6. Then amazing. The Rebbe says, and by the way, it's al derech, and it's a kol shekain and kal v'chaimer from the mitzvah of Yiras Hamikdash. This is mamish what Hillel Moshe Meshel said. And the Avnei Nezer was not impressed by this. What? You're making a hekesh? You're making a kal v'chaimer? The Rebbe says, we have al derech, that's the hekesh, and kol shekain the kal v'chaimer from the mitzvah of Yiras Hamikdash. That's only an asay. Kol shekain for Shmiras Hamikdash, which is both an asay and a lois asay. And then the Rebbe ends off this section of the Sikha, Uchamavur calls Eba Arucha in the Sefer Mishkanes Lavir Yaakov. Und the Mechaber HaSefer bleibt azelam askana, bis hazer mishtadol gaven, as the mitzvahs of Mekuin Veren Kedu. And he, in fact, didn't only write a book, he also started a program. We were able to get a small taste of it. He tried buying the house and getting permission from the Ottoman authorities to be able to do this. Okay. Now it leads to the question, the Rebbe's question of the Sikh is, why then didn't Daily Yisrael get involved in this mitzvah? The bigger question is, on Rabbi Seinu Nisiyenu, the Rebbe says a very interesting line. The Rabbi Seinu Nisiyenu did so much work for Kol Chabad, for Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael, so then why didn't they do this? I'll be honest, I don't understand the question so much. I don't understand the connection between Kol Chabad and the mitzvah Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. How does that lead you to Shmiras Hamikdash? But that's the way the Rebbe words the question. The Rabbi Seinu Nisiyenu did so much for the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael and a Chazakas Yishuv and the Koilel, Chabad and all that thing, so then obviously they should have done a Shmiras Hamikdash. I'm missing something. I don't understand the link between one and the other. But that's the question that Rebbe asks on Rabbi Seinu Nisienu. What about Reb Hillel Moshe Meshel? The Rebbe says it's a das yachid. No one accepted it. What's going on over here? Why? Here's the Rebbe's answer in the Sikha. The answer comes in 2 stages. Stage 1, the answer is via Shloimar. After the Churban Beis Hamikdash, doing this idea of Shmiras Hamikdash is Sakanas Nefashos. What does this mean? That at least at certain times, it could be really dangerous. But imagine, the Romans, they wouldn't have allowed you to do it. They would say, you're guarding the Mikdash? We raised the Mikdash. So it would have been Sakanas Nefashos. So therefore, Chiven de Itchi Itchi, the Rebbe says, and once you canceled it, it's canceled forever. Now this needs an investigation. What does that mean? Once it's canceled forever, even in a time when there's no Pikuach Nefesh? Is that how it works? If you want to suspend the mitzvah because of Pikuach Nefesh, so therefore it gets suspended indefinitely, what's the science over here? What's the Talmudic logic here? But we don't have to go too far into that, because the Rebbe then goes Nachmer and gives a different explanation, which therefore let's focus on this. And here let's read inside. I'll tell you what we're going to read and then we'll read it. The Rebbe's argument is, there's no such thing as sakana, no sakana. There's always sakana. That's going to be the central argument. And this is why it's always pikuach nefesh, and this is why it was not done. In other words, okay, let's read inside. Nachmer. The sakana b'poyel von umetz ha'elam is b'meshach kol zman hagala. It's not like he said before that there's times of sakana, and about the other times, once it's canceled, it's canceled. No, the sakana is b'meshach kol zman hagalos. Afilu ven dort hat gewaltig am malchus shel chesed. Even when a peaceful and pleasant and kind government was in control there. I assume he's referring to the British. Unafilu, though you can, there's some statements from the Frierdiker Rebbe implying that they were very different from that. But okay. Unafilu ven yad Yisrael takifa. Even when Jews have control, it's still sakanas nefashos. And even even if there's a peace agreement, is calls man was megafint in Galos. So long that we're in a status of exile, is mentachas shibud malchus ha'umas olam. We're still under the yoke of the nations of the world. Umatam klal, and we have the rule that halachi biyadu she'etzasan el Yaakov, that there is an underlying and inherent streak of anti-Semitism. And it's always going to be there. And here the Rebbe lays out why anti-Semitism continues. Interesting. Ha'av yerish lebnoi, parents give to the children. Ubefrat azer is imechanech b'derezeh. So number 1 is parents pass it down, especially if the parent educates in that way. Number 3, und die Kinder sehen und lernen sich von Hanhogas Avesem. Children also learn from the behavior of their parents. So it seems like there's 3 elements of how anti-Semitism gets passed down. One is kind of like innate, av yerish lebnoi. Then there's nurture, and then there's by observation, by just seeing what their parents do. Und der Ribber is moving as afilu ven yad Yisrael takifo mahata eskem shalom, even when the Jewish people are in control, and even if there's a peace agreement, zainen goyim b'chal b'chesed sakana, there's always an underlying danger. Umekenit wissen was es einmachen. We don't know what's going to be tomorrow. What's going to be? See, even if you say today there is no sakana, but you're allowed to, and you have to take into consideration what's going to be tomorrow. In addition, even if it's a true peace agreement, you only make an agreement with the government. What about a lone wolf terrorist? And because of this reason, even if you accept the svara that it's shaykh bisman hazeh, which the Rebbe seems to have an inclination to say is right, nonetheless, this would be the reason why it was not being observed. So not for the Avnei Nezer's reasons of avoida and tuma and mishoidim and shayarim and all those stuff and the munkatcher, you need to have the bias and all these issues. No, this is not the reason why. If you accept, the Rebbe seems to have a strong tendency, I wouldn't say it's 100%, but a strong tendency to accept that Bill Moshe Meshel's arguments, and the reason it wasn't accepted is because there's an issue here of Safek Pikuach Nefesh, and that's why. So the mitzvah is there, but it's suspended because of Safek Pikuach Nefesh. The Rebbe then in Ha'ara says, but I'm still not so happy, Benegei Rabbi Seinu Nisienu, they went on Mesidas Nefesh, couldn't they figured out a way how to do it, at least sometimes to figure out a way to do Shmiras Hamikdash in a way that it wouldn't have caused any Pekuach Nefesh, and the Rebbe does not answer that and leaves that as a question in the Ha'ara of the Sikh, which is very, very interesting and very, very unique. So what's the bottom line of all this? In these sikhs, the Rebbe does not say, and by the way, we have the endorsement of the Tzemach Tzedek, right? We don't have that. The Rebbe in these sikhs ignores the chaloim, ignores the whole story, ignores the Haskamah, and I think all these sources work very well together. There's no contradiction. There's no contradiction between the sources that on the one hand say these are shocking stories, that the Achsidische Baldimien, in Lubavitch and gehalten von him. At the same time, you could say he has very good halachic arguments that the mitzvah of Shmiras Hamikdash is something that theoretically should have been done today. And I think this actually teaches us a very important lesson. And not this is but for me, I found it interesting because human beings, we have a tendency to like either you're 100% good in the skabel and you're perfect in my book, and now I'm going to listen to you, or you have a flaw, so boom, I cancel you and you're gone. I can't listen to anything that you said. Right? How often have you been involved in a conversation when someone says, "Who said that? Him? This guy? What are you talking about? You know what he once did? And that one thing that he once did canceled everything that he says." I know sometimes when I say something, I know I can't say the name of Shem Imre. Because I know if I say the Shem Imre, the people are going to go, and they're not going to accept the vart. It's horrible that I feel that way, but I sometimes feel that way. So here we see, no, you could have both at the same time. So that's, I think, an amazing lesson for life. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, in this Sikh in Tov Shanun, the Rebbe concludes by saying the following. That although we can't do Shmiras HaMikdash Begashmias today because of Pikuach Nefesh, we could do it Beruchnias. We all have a personal Beis Hamikdash. The personal Beis Hamikdash is the Kedusha that we have in our life. What's Shmira mean? Shmira means covet. That's all it means. It means you're lending prominence to it. You're giving it more dignity. So when you take your Svarim at home, the Rebbe said in the Sikha, or when you take your Staka Pushke and you treat it a level up than you do a regular Gashmiastic thing, so that's giving it covet, so that's covet HaMikdash. That's bringing honor to the mikdash, the personal mikdash that we all have in our lives. So that's the way in Avodah that we're able to do this particular thing. So, Haskamah from the Tzemach Tzedek, maybe he doesn't have. But does he have a shtickle Haskamah from the Lubavitcher Rebbe? All right.
Okay.